And with me now in our Sydney studio is the Treasurer, Joe Hockey. Nice to see you, Mr Hockey.
Great to be here, mate.
Lots to get through. I'll come to GrainCorp later. Let's start with electricity prices. As we heard in that story, the gas and electricity companies are casting some doubt over whether there will be price cuts after the carbon tax repeal. Does the Abbott government stand by its pledge that electricity bills will go down by 9% and gas bills by 7%?
Yes, we do. And obviously we'll be giving the ACCC all the powers and resources it needs to ensure that all of those parties comply with the changes in the law.
AGL, which supplies more than 3 million customers, says that there's a lead time of months for price changes to go through and that after July the 1st next year, non-carbon factors will drive price rises. It doesn't sound very much like people can expect cuts in their bills.
Well, if you take the carbon tax away, then you are going to see a reduction in the electricity price. And Kevin Rudd admitted that before the election when he claimed that he was getting rid of the carbon tax and bringing in an emissions trading scheme which he claimed would reduce the cost of electricity. So just to be realistic about this, on the one hand, Labor can't claim that it's not going to work, and on the other hand, a few weeks ago, they were actually campaigning for it.
Well, let's talk about the actual gas and electricity companies, not what Labor says. Why should we believe you and not what they're saying? Because they're the ones, of course, in the hot seat to pass on or not pass on the price cuts. Well,
let's just see how it pans out. It wouldn't surprise me that self-interest is at play with some of these companies. They're in a negotiating mode, if you like. From our perspective, there is no negotiation. The carbon tax has to go. And of course, the savings need to be passed through to electricity and gas consumers.
Would you expect that in people's very first bills after the carbon tax repeal that they should see an immediate reduction?
Well, it depends on the timing of the bills. I can't give you a box and dice on that. But just as it didn't immediately flow through at the time of the passage of the original legislation, it had a start date. So too would you see it with a repeal date.
You did a press conference on October 23rd where you used the CPI figures to point out from the time at which the carbon tax had come in that Labor had been responsible for a 22% increase in electricity prices. Is it reasonable then for the public to apply the same standard for you and look at basically from when the carbon tax repeals comes through, what does the CPI shows happens to electricity prices?
Look, I would expect the public to hold us to our word. We expect nothing less, and we will keep our word. It's as simple as that, Lee. The issue at the moment in play is that Labor doesn't want to repeal the carbon tax, and their partners, the Greens, are also not wanting to repeal the carbon tax. So Labor is completely disregarding the outcome from the last election, and instead, Bill Shorten and his team are now arguing that electricity prices should be higher. They've got to explain that, because they're the ones that control the decision now. We're putting our cards on the table.
Let's say they see the light, as you might put it, on that issue.
If only they would see the light. Yeah.
Do you accept that on this issue, that for you, it's a huge article of faith with the electorate, because you went to the election, you said we're going to axe the tax, you're going to see these reductions in your price bills. Do you accept that if those things don't happen, that you will have breached some trust with the electorate?
No, they will happen. Prices will come down, and certainly be less than what they would have been if not for the carbon tax.
Let's turn to the announcement you made today regarding changes to tax measures and not going ahead with certain initiatives that will deprive the budget of $1.3 billion. You've said you're committed to reining in debt and deficit. Why then are you heading in the opposite direction?
Well, we're not. Every cupboard I'm opening has spiders in it as a result of Labor, and I'm dealing with it.
What do you mean by that?
Well, for example, the fact that they left 96 tax initiatives and superannuation initiatives that they announced, and some of them went back to our previous term in government, to 2001, yet never legislated, means that someone has to pick up the pieces. And I have decided with my colleagues in Cabinet that we are going to clear the decks. 96 announced but unlegislated initiatives are being dealt with. Some we are proceeding with, and that delivers $12 billion in revenue. Some are undeliverable, and they're the ones that some critics have come out about today. It is no use having a grand announcement on tax if you're not going to raise the money, and even worse, if the bureaucrats tell us they don't know how to legislate, how to draft the legislation. That's what I was confronted with, and that's what we're dealing with.
Let me ask you to respond to the point raised by the former Gillard government advisor in that story, that your actions don't add up with what you've said, that we're in a budget emergency.
Well, that Gillard advisor is one of the architects of the problems that we've inherited. The fact is the budget has deteriorated under the previous government.
But you're not acting with the urgency that we might expect.
Because the first thing you've got to do is identify the problem, Lee. I identified that the Reserve Bank needed $8.8 billion and we've fixed that. Now I've found out that not only has the ACCC, the competition regulator, made a loss for the last 4 years, this year it's going to run out of money in April. Before the end of the financial year. And the ACCC, unless it has a significant injection of money, tens of millions of dollars.
Well, how are they going to chase those power companies down?
Well, that's right. Well, exactly right. Exactly right. But every cupboard we are opening, we are discovering more inherited problems. Now, the fact is, it's one thing to identify them, which we are doing, and we will show the Australian people the full details of what we've inherited when we release our mid-year economic statement.
Okay.
But the budget is going to fix it, and that's what we're focused on.
I want to run through a couple of other things quickly. I mentioned that I'd come to GrainCorp before. You have to make a decision by mid-December as Treasurer as to whether you're going to allow the US grain giant ADM to take over Australia's largest grain handler, GrainCorp. When you were asked about it today, we heard you say that you wouldn't be bullied or intimidated by anyone when it comes to dealing with the national interest. Who's bullying you?
Well, I'm not suggesting anybody in particular is bullying me, but I am suggesting that I'm giving a message to everybody,
including your own colleagues,
everybody, including companies and others, that when it comes to the national interest, the decision is made putting Australia first, and that's what I'll be doing.
So you're saying you won't be necessarily taking the concerns of your National Party colleagues into account?
I'm happy to hear the concerns expressed by people in various forums, but the bottom line is I have a legal obligation to make a decision and to put the national interest first, and that's what I am going to do.
The issue of politicians' entitlements continues to kick along. Do you accept Barnaby Joyce's argument that spending $5,000 or so of taxpayers' money to attend the State of Origin and 2 other NRL matches constitutes official business? Well,
if anyone has breached the rules, then they should be held to account.
Would you, for example, claim for attending the State of Origin interstate?
Well, if it was part of my work commitment, if I'm only invited because I am the Treasurer or the Shadow Treasurer and I'm only there for that purpose, then it's part of work. But, the fact is, if anyone is abusing the system, they should be held to account. Of course they should, no matter what. But I just say, is it inappropriate for a politician to attend a state funeral? That's a question.
Well, what about if I invited you to my wedding? Would you think that was a work function?
I don't want to let any cats out of the bag here, but look, if it is part of work, then yes, it is part of work. But if it's not, this is a judgment call. But if you're invited to a state funeral as a Member of Parliament, you'd expect that it's part of your job. So who's going to make these calls? Well, comes down to the judgment of the individual. Before people start trawling around, you didn't attend my wedding, so that's fine. Would have been a great party though, I'm sure. Joe Hockey, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you.